It was 15 degrees Fahrenheit on New Year's Eve. That's not an exaggeration. It was the literal temperature when my father, Arthur, pushed me onto the back porch, and I heard the thick click of the lock. My offense? I had dared to speak up for myself before the main course. I just stood there in a flimsy sweater, my breath fogging the frosted glass of the sliding door. My jaw was clenched so tight from the chattering of my teeth that it ached. Inside, the house was a portrait of warmth, bathed in a soft golden glow. I could make out my stepmother, Catherine, offering my father a glass of champagne, her laughter silent but visible. They were a perfect holiday postcard. I was the forgotten refuse left on the curb to be collected in the morning. My fingertips were already starting to turn a pale, waxy blue. For a moment, I genuinely believed I was going to die right there, a frozen statue in the backyard of my own home. That's when a pair of sharp headlights sliced through the inky blackness. A long, dark limousine navigated the snow-covered driveway, its tires crunching softly before it stopped directly in front of me. The rear door swung open, and a woman emerged into the swirling snow, impossibly poised in a pair of sharp heels. It was my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, the matriarch and billionaire everyone in our family thought was lost to us. She gazed at me, a shivering mess in the snow. There was no offer of an embrace. Her eyes flicked from me to the house, then back to me, before she spoke a single word to her security detail. Demolish. And in that instant, I understood that New Year's miracles don't always show up with confetti and resolutions. Sometimes they arrive in an armored car. Before we get into what happened next, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I hadn't seen my grandmother in 7 years. The last time I laid eyes on Eleanor Vance, I was 18 years old, packed and ready for college. She had stood on the grand steps of her own palatial estate watching me leave. She didn't wave then, and she wasn't waving now. She just sat in the back of the limousine, perfectly framed by the dark leather interior, an empress on her mobile throne. The wind was a physical force, a brutal shove that nearly knocked me off my feet. The shaking was uncontrollable now. My whole body felt like it was vibrating on a frequency so high my bones might just shatter. "Well," she said, her voice quiet but piercing, cutting through the gale with ease. "Get in, Maya. You're letting all the warm air out." I didn't have the energy to question it. I was too cold for shock. I just stumbled forward, my legs feeling like uncooperative blocks of ice, nearly tumbling into the vehicle. The leather seat was blissfully warm. The air inside was thick with the scent of luxury, a mix of old books, a hint of vanilla, and something crisp like juniper. The heavy door closed with a solid thud, and the world went silent. The storm was gone. I just sat there, dripping melted snow onto the pristine floor mats, my teeth still rattling with a percussive clack, clack, clack that seemed to fill the sudden quiet. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to force some warmth back into my core. My fingers were a stark, waxy white. They didn't even look like they belonged to me. Eleanor didn't gasp or fuss over me. She didn't wrap me in a frantic hug and ask if I was okay, the way a normal grandmother might. But Eleanor was anything but normal. She had built empires and crushed rivals. Pity wasn't in her vocabulary. She simply observed me. Her gaze was analytical, sweeping from my soaked, frozen hair down to my trembling knees, as if she were auditing a financial report and had found a glaring error. Then she acted. She reached to the seat beside her and retrieved a coat. It was a substantial, dark wool trench, looking almost like a military officer's greatcoat. She tossed it across the seat, and it landed with a satisfying weight on my lap. "Put your arms through the sleeves," she commanded. Hypothermia is a dreadfully boring way to perish, Maya. It's inefficient and lacks any sense of dignity. I fumbled with the coat, my fingers so numb and stiff they refused to cooperate. It took me 3 attempts just to guide my hand into the first sleeve. The wool was dense and slightly coarse, but it was incredibly warm, holding the car's heat like a radiator. I pulled it tight around my body, burying my face in the collar. A sob caught in my throat, a dry, racking heave that was all pain and no tears. Eleanor poured a glass of water from a beautiful crystal decanter and held it out. "Drink," she said, "then breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Get a hold of yourself." I took the glass with both hands, afraid I might drop it. The water was cool, not cold. I drank it all in one go. "I thought you were in Europe," I croaked, my voice raw and broken. "Dad said you were. He said you were sick, in a special home in Austria." Eleanor made a short, sharp sound that might have been a laugh, but her expression didn't change. "Arthur says a great many things," she remarked. "He's always preferred a reality that can be easily edited. It makes him feel powerful." She turned her head to look out the window. The limo's windows were so heavily tinted that we were invisible from the outside, but we had a perfect view. I followed her gaze. We were parked directly in front of the house, the Reed estate. It was a behemoth of brick and stone, 3 stories high with imposing pillars out front. It looked stunning in the snow, like the kind of place where a happy, loving family would live. Through the huge bay window of the dining room, I could see them clearly. The glass was clear in the center, where the heat from inside kept the frost at bay. It was like watching a private screening. My father, Arthur, stood at the head of the table, resplendent in his velvet dinner jacket. He held a glass of champagne aloft, a charming smile plastered on his face, the one he reserved for investors, important neighbors, and anyone he wanted to manipulate. My stepmother, Catherine, was seated at his right, beaming. She had her hand on his arm, gazing up at him with pure adoration, wearing a crimson silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. And then I saw her, Chloe, my stepsister. She was sitting in my chair. She was tearing the wrapping off a present, and I saw the flash of silver paper. She lifted a handbag from the box. I knew the brand instantly. It was the exact bag I had mentioned wanting 3 months ago, back when I was naive enough to think my desires mattered to them. Chloe hugged the bag to her chest and smiled radiantly at my father. They looked so warm, so content, so perfect. "Look at them," Eleanor said, her voice a low murmur. "A performance." "They don't care," I whispered, the realization hitting me with more force than the freezing wind had. "I've been out here for an hour. It's 15 degrees, and they're just having dinner." I saw my father raise his glass, clearly making a toast. I could almost hear the words, a toast to family, to prosperity, to the new year. He never once glanced at the back door. He didn't check his phone. He didn't seem to have a single thought about where his daughter might be. "He believes he's won," Eleanor stated. She wasn't looking at the family now, but at the structure of the house itself. "He believes he has successfully disposed of the problem. That's you, my dear. You are the problem he intended to solve tonight." "I just wanted some of the roasted vegetables," I said, the sheer absurdity of the situation bubbling up. "That's how this all started. I asked for the serving dish before he gave the toast." "It was never about the vegetables, Maya." Eleanor turned back to me, her eyes as hard and gray as granite. "Men like Arthur don't punish you for your actions. They punish you for your existence. He locked you out tonight because you are alive. And as long as you are alive, you are a living reminder that he is a fraud. I looked back through the window. My father took a celebratory sip of champagne, looking utterly satisfied with himself. He was a king in his castle, but he had no idea his castle was already under siege. He had no idea that just a few yards away, cloaked in the darkness of the night, the true owner of his little world was watching his every move. "He's comfortable," I said. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. She settled back into the plush leather and crossed her legs elegantly. "Enjoy the view, Maya. Memorize it, because comfort is a luxury, and Arthur is about to find out his credit has been revoked." I pulled the heavy wool coat tighter. The violent shivering had started to subside, replaced by a deep, throbbing ache in my bones. I watched my father laugh at something Catherine said. He didn't know his little show was already over. To truly grasp why I was freezing on that porch, you need to understand Arthur Reed. My father wasn't just a strict man, he was a human thermostat, obsessed with controlling the emotional temperature of our lives. He didn't just enter a room, he managed it. If he was in a good mood, we were all permitted to feel warm. But if he was angry, or worse, bored, he would dial down the temperature until everyone was shivering with anxiety. You never knew what might set him off. A grade on a report card, the sound of you chewing your food, the inflection in your voice when you said, "Good morning." He was never physical. He never laid a hand on me. He didn't need to. Physical violence is crude and messy. Arthur preferred a more refined form of psychological warfare. He called it building character. When I was 12, I accidentally left a light on in the hallway. He didn't yell. He simply walked into my bedroom and bathroom and unscrewed every single light bulb. For a full week, I had to live in complete darkness after sunset. He said he was teaching me the value of resources. When I was 16, I got a B+ on an English essay. He responded by removing the door from my bedroom. "Privacy is a privilege earned by excellence," he told me calmly. "Mediocrity doesn't deserve walls." I spent my childhood believing this was normal. I assumed all fathers were like this, that love was a currency you had to earn with relentless perfection, and even then, the exchange rate could change at any moment. And then, there was Catherine. My stepmother didn't care about character, she cared about appearances. Her entire existence was curated for the perfect photograph, the enviable social media post, the whispered compliment from a neighbor. She was beautiful, impeccably dressed, and deeply terrified of losing her looks. To Catherine, I wasn't a stepdaughter, I was an accessory. If I looked the part, I was useful. If my accomplishments made the family look good, she would link her arm through mine and call me her sweet girl for the cameras. But the moment we were in private, that warmth would evaporate. She treated my feelings like they were stains on her white carpet. If I was sad, I was being difficult. If I was angry, I was ungrateful. If I was hurting, I was being dramatic. "Smile, Maya," she would hiss at me before we entered a party. Nobody wants to see a sour face. It ruins the aesthetic. And finally, there was Chloe, 2 years younger than me, Catherine's daughter from a previous marriage. She had her mother's blonde hair, wide blue eyes, and the soul of a magpie. Chloe didn't just want things, she wanted my things. It started with toys when we were kids. If I had a doll she liked, she had to have it. The moment I gave it to her, she'd break it. As we grew up, her focus shifted to my clothes, my friends, and eventually my ideas. Chloe learned early that Arthur enjoyed pitting us against each other. It was a game to him. He'd toss a metaphorical scrap of his approval into the middle of the room and watch us claw at each other for it. By the time I turned 25, I was utterly exhausted. I was broken. I had spent my entire life contorting myself into the daughter they wanted. I attended the university Arthur chose, majored in the subject he demanded, wore the clothes Catherine approved of, and I let Chloe take credit for my successes. And what did it get me? It got me here, tonight, New Year's Eve. The incident that led to my exile wasn't even a major fight. That was the most tragic part. It was a simple, quiet moment of honesty. We were seated at the dining table. The appetizers, oysters, Arthur's favorite, had just been served. The house was decorated to within an inch of its life. The tree stood 12 feet tall, glittering with white lights and gold ribbons. I had come home because I had nowhere else to go. My tech startup, a company I had poured my heart and soul into for 3 straight years, had spectacularly collapsed the week before. I was officially bankrupt. I had lost my apartment. I was deeply humiliated. I had foolishly thought that family was the one place you could go when you hit rock bottom. I thought that if I was truly broken, they might actually extend a hand to help me up. I was wrong. Dinner began, with Arthur making a light-hearted jab at my failure. "Well," he said, spooning mignonette sauce onto an oyster, "at least now we know you don't have the stomach for the world of business. It's a relief, really. Now you can find a nice man to take care of you. Maybe an executive who needs a good personal assistant." Catherine tittered. "Oh, Arthur, stop. She tried her best. It's adorable that she tried." "I didn't just try," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was staring at my plate. "I built something. It failed because my primary investor was poached at the last minute. It wasn't a lack of competence. It was sabotage." "Excuses," Arthur said dismissively, not even looking at me. "Winners find a way to win. Losers find excuses for why they didn't." "I'm not a loser," I said. The table fell silent. Arthur placed his fork down, and the clink of metal against porcelain sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Pardon me?" he said softly. "I said I'm not a loser," I repeated, looking up and meeting his gaze for the first time. "I worked 18-hour days. I wrote the code myself. I lost everything, Dad. I lost my home. I don't need a lecture right now. I need my dad." The temperature in the room plummeted. I saw Catherine's eyes widen in alarm, not for me, but at the sheer social awkwardness of the moment. "You are a guest in this house," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low and calm, "and you are speaking to me with a tone I do not appreciate." "I'm not a guest," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm your daughter." "You are a mouth," he declared. "A loud, ungrateful mouth, and frankly, I am tired of listening to it." He stood up and walked over to my chair. I braced myself, expecting him to yell. Instead, he gripped my arm, his fingers like a vice. "You need to cool off," he said, pulling me to my feet. He began dragging me toward the back of the house. Catherine didn't move a muscle. Chloe took a delicate bite of her oyster, watching me with an expression of complete boredom. "Dad, please," I begged. "It's freezing out there. I don't have a coat." "Then perhaps you should have considered that before you raised your voice," he said. He wrenched the door open. The Arctic wind hit me like a solid wall. He shoved me, and I stumbled out onto the porch, my thin slippers sliding on the snow. "5 minutes," he said, "to reflect on your tone." He slammed the door, and I heard the lock engage. 5 minutes became 10. 10 stretched to 30. 30 minutes became an hour. I knocked on the glass. I pleaded. I watched them move on to the main course. I saw them laughing. They either couldn't hear me over the wind or they simply chose not to. That was the fundamental truth of the Reed family. They didn't run on love. They ran on power. And tonight, Arthur felt powerful because he could make me freeze. He felt big because he could make me small. Now, sitting in the limo, wrapped in my grandmother's coat, I understood. Every insult, every punishment, every one of his so-called lessons, it wasn't because I was flawed. It was because they were empty. They needed my pain to feel whole. Arthur needed someone to control. Catherine needed someone to look down upon. Chloe needed someone to steal from. I was their fuel source. I looked at the window again. Arthur was pouring more champagne. The shivering had stopped completely now, replaced by a strange cold fire rising in my chest. It wasn't the car's heater. It was pure, distilled rage. For 25 years I had bought into their narrative. I believed I was the problem. I believed I was lucky they even kept me around. I looked at Eleanor. "They're not a family," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "They're a pack of vampires." Eleanor nodded slowly. She reached for the intercom button near her door handle. "Vampires don't fare well in the sunlight," she said, "and they certainly don't fare well when you cut off their blood supply." She pressed the button. "Driver," she said, "is the team in position?" "Yes, Mrs. Vance," the driver's voice replied crisply through the speaker, "ready on your command." Eleanor looked at me, a tiny, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "You've been the victim for a very long time, Maya," she said. "How does it fit you?" "No," I said. "It's too tight." "Good," she said. "Then let's take it off." I looked back at the house one last time. I saw my father laughing, my stepmother preening, and all the warmth I had craved my entire life. And I realized with shocking clarity that I didn't want to go inside anymore. I didn't want to be warm with them. I wanted to burn their world to the ground. Eleanor didn't try to comfort me. She didn't pat my hand or murmur that everything would be all right. She just watched me, her eyes sharp and discerning, like a hawk tracking its prey. "You're still trembling," she observed. "I'm cold," I said. "No," she corrected flatly. "You're warm. The cabin is set to 72 degrees. You're trembling from shock. You're trembling because your entire reality is fracturing." She poured herself a drink from the crystal decanter, an amber liquid swirling in the glass. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her eyes never leaving mine. "Tell me, Maya, why do you believe he did it?" I pulled the wool coat tighter around my neck. The smell of the expensive fabric was a small comfort, but her question tied my stomach in knots. "Because I talked back," I whispered. "Because I ruined the dinner. Because I'm a failure who bankrupted her company and he's ashamed of me." "Wrong," Eleanor said, setting her glass down with a firm click. "Wrong on all counts." She leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw her expression soften by a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was a focused intensity. "He didn't lock you out because you disrespected him," she said, her voice low and even. "He didn't lock you out because you failed. He locked you out because he felt small." I frowned. Small? He's the most powerful man I know. He controls everything. The house, the money, our lives. "He owns nothing," Eleanor cut in sharply. "We will get to that. But look at the man, Maya. Really, look at him." She pointed a manicured finger toward the house. Through the tinted glass, I looked at my father, laughing at the head of his table, flushed and victorious. "Weak men," Eleanor said, "require a witness to their strength. They need someone freezing outside so they can feel warm inside. If everyone in the room is content, Arthur feels irrelevant. If everyone is secure, he feels invisible. He requires a victim to validate his own existence." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. "He believes you are his burden," she continued, "the cross he has to bear. But he's wrong. You aren't his burden, Maya. You're his fuel." I stared at her, uncomprehending. Fuel? He burns you to keep himself warm, she said simply. He takes your confidence, your joy, and your peace, and he shovels it into the furnace of his own ego, and you allow it. You stand there and hand him the kindling. I don't let him, I argued, my voice rising. I fight back. I try to be perfect. I try to make him happy. Precisely, she said, you try. You perform for him. You cry for him. You beg him to let you back inside. That is the fuel. He thrives on your desperation. It makes him feel like a god. She sat back. Stop performing, Maya. I looked down at my hands. They were pink now, the blood slowly returning. It's not that simple, I said. He's my father. I just wanted him to be proud of me. When I lost my company, all I wanted was for him to tell me it would be okay. He was never going to say that, Eleanor stated, her tone ruthless. Because if you are okay, then he is not needed. Arthur needs you to be broken. Why do you think he mocked your failure? Why do you think he humiliated you in front of your stepmother and stepsister? She paused, letting the silence hang between us. He was glad you failed, she said. My head snapped up. That's not true. He paid for my education. He wants me to be successful. He wants you to be successful enough to be a good reflection on him, but never so successful that you no longer need him, she corrected. There is a critical difference. A strong father raises his children to fly away. A weak father clips their wings, so they are forced to stay in the nest and beg for scraps. I felt a single tear trace a path down my cheek. This time, it wasn't from the cold. It was from the searing heat of the truth. It explained everything. It explained why he never celebrated my achievements, only harped on my mistakes. It explained why he ignored my successful launch, but seemed to revel in my spectacular crash. It explained his pity. Pity is just another form of control. If you pity someone, you are placing yourself above them. He's a bully, I whispered. He is a small man in a very large chair, Eleanor corrected. And tonight, we are going to take that chair away from him. She reached into her small black clutch and pulled out a compact mirror, snapping it open and handing it to me. Look at yourself, she ordered. I looked. My reflection was a mess. My hair was a wet, tangled disaster. My mascara had left dark tracks down my cheeks. My lips were chapped and pale. My eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. I look horrible, I said, trying to hand it back. No, Eleanor insisted, tilting the mirror back toward my face. Look closer. You look like a survivor. I stared at my own reflection. Beyond the smeared makeup and the exhaustion, my eyes looked different. They weren't pleading anymore. They were hard. He imagines you're out there crying, Eleanor said. He imagines you're huddled by the door, shivering and begging for his mercy. He pictures himself in 10 minutes magnanimously opening the door, and you will crawl back in, apologizing profusely for ruining his evening. You will be grateful. You will be submissive. And he will feel like a benevolent king forgiving a peasant. She snapped the mirror shut. Is that what's going to happen, Maya? I looked at the house. I looked at the man who had left me to freeze. I remembered the feeling of the ice seeping into my bones. I remembered the smug little smirk on Chloe's face. No, I said. The word was solid, heavy. Good, Eleanor said. Then dry your face. The time for tears is over. The time for business has begun. She handed me a tissue. I wiped the black smudges from under my eyes. I smoothed back my hair. What are we going to do? I asked. Eleanor smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that has just spotted an open gate. We're going to teach him a lesson about controlling the temperature, she said. He enjoys making his environment cold. Let's see how he fares when the environment decides to control him. Eleanor pressed the intercom button again. "Driver," she said, her voice as crisp as if she were ordering a coffee. "Cut the power to the main residence." "Copy that, Mrs. Vance," the driver replied immediately. I sat up straighter. "You can do that?" "I own the utility grid for this entire sector of the county," she said calmly. "I had it installed in 1998. Arthur never bothered to change the administrative access codes. He assumes utilities are a form of magic that just happens for him." She turned her gaze back to the house. "Watch." I watched. Inside the dining room, the tableau was still perfect. Catherine was lifting a fork to her mouth. Arthur was pouring more champagne. Chloe was admiring her new bag. And then, in a single silent beat, their world ended. Blink. The house was gone. The warm glow of the chandelier vanished. The twinkling lights on the 12-foot tree went dark. The lamps in the hall, the lights on the porch, the glowing windows on the upper floors, all of it was extinguished in an instant. The house became a massive black tomb set against the swirling snow. I let out a small gasp. It was breathtaking to see something so large and bright go so dark, so fast. "Phase 1 complete," Eleanor murmured. For a few seconds there was nothing, just a dark silhouette. Then the panic began. Small, frantic beams of light appeared in the dining room window, cell phone flashlights jerking around wildly. I saw one of the beams swing up as someone, probably Catherine, stood up too quickly. I could imagine the chaos inside, the confusion, the jarring silence that follows when the hum of the furnace and refrigerator suddenly ceases. "It's going to get cold in there fast," I said. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "It is. The insulation in that house is decades old. Without the furnace running, the ambient temperature will drop 10 degrees in the first hour. By midnight, they'll be able to see their own breath." She adjusted the collar of her coat. "He wanted you to feel the cold, Maya. Now he gets to share the experience." I watched the flashlight beams dance around the room. I saw a figure, my father, move toward the window and press his face to the glass, trying to see out. He couldn't see us. Our car was just a dark shape in the shadows of the driveway, its engine idling almost silently. We were completely invisible, but the flashlight in his own hand illuminated his face perfectly. He looked annoyed, not scared yet, just irritated. He was likely assuming it was a simple power outage from the storm, blaming the utility company or the weather. He had no idea this was personal. "He's probably going to the basement to check the breaker box," I guessed. "Let him," Eleanor said. "The breakers are fine. I had the main line physically severed at the junction box at the end of the driveway. My team took care of it while we were talking." I stared at her, stunned. "You brought a team?" "I never travel alone," she said. "And I never enter a hostile negotiation without leverage." Leverage. That's what this was. This wasn't a grandmother visiting for the holidays. This was a corporate raider staging a hostile takeover. We sat there in the dark, warm car, watching the frantic fireflies of their flashlights. I saw Chloe's silhouette move toward the hall, probably to find a coat. I saw Catherine standing frozen in place, hugging herself. And then a strange feeling washed over me. An hour ago, I had been the victim. I was the girl locked outside in a blizzard. I was the one shivering powerless, waiting for someone else's mercy. But now, I was on the other side of the glass. I was warm, I was safe, and I was the one watching them scramble in the cold and the dark. The power dynamic had flipped so fast it was giving me whiplash. "How does it feel?" Eleanor asked. She was watching me, not the house. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the warm, expensive-smelling air of the car. I searched for the word. I feel like the main switch. Good, she said, because you are. She reached into the side pocket of the door and pulled out a thick file folder, tossing it onto my lap. Read this, she said. We have about 10 minutes before the cold really starts to bother them. You need to understand exactly what you're walking into. I opened the folder. A small focused reading light clicked on above my head. The first page was a document titled Vance Holdings, Asset Transfer. I scanned the lines of dense legal jargon, the dates, the signatures, and then my eyes locked on to a line item, unauthorized withdrawal. Suspect, Arthur Reed. Amount, $300,000. Date, October 18, 2023. I looked up, my mouth hanging open. He stole from you. He attempted to, Eleanor corrected. He forged my signature to pull from a secondary trust fund. He assumed I was too senile and detached to notice. He thought I was wasting away in some Austrian clinic, medicated into oblivion. She smiled, that thin, dangerous smile again. He didn't realize I owned the bank, Maya. The fraud alert was sent to my personal phone before the ink on the check was even dry. Why didn't you stop him then? I asked. Because I was waiting, she said. I was observing. I wanted to see how deep the rot went. I wanted to see what he would do with the money. What did he do with it? He bought a sports car, she said, and a diamond necklace for Catherine, and he settled a very large, very pressing gambling debt. She gestured toward the house again. He plays the part of the successful patriarch, but he is rotting from the inside out. He's broke, Maya. He has been living on fumes, credit, and stolen funds for the past 3 years. My mind was racing. The lavish dinners, the exotic vacations, the expensive gifts. It was all a complete lie. He's broke? I repeated. Destitute, she confirmed. And desperate. That's why he was so vicious to you about your startup. He's jealous. You actually built something from nothing. He just steals things and paints them gold to pass them off as his own. I looked back at the house. The flashlight beams were moving faster now. I could practically feel the panic rising as they started to realize the power wasn't coming back on. My father wasn't just a bully. He was a common thief, a fraud. And in that moment, my fear vanished completely. You can be afraid of a monster, but you can't be afraid of a clown. And that's what he was, a sad, pathetic, broke clown dancing in the dark. I'm ready, I said, closing the folder. Not yet, Eleanor said. Let them get a little colder. Let the house drop another 5 degrees. I want him to fully comprehend the physics of his situation. She glanced at her watch, a slim, diamond-encrusted timepiece. 5 more minutes, she said. Then we knock. I settled back into the seat and watched the dark house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for my father to tell me what to do. I was waiting for the signal to dismantle his entire world. I stared at the window where he had toasted his perfect little family just 20 minutes ago. Freeze, I thought. Freeze, you bastard. It was the most honest thought I had ever had. We had 5 minutes left before the invasion. Inside the limousine, the air was still and warm. Outside, the wind howled, battering the car and shaking the heavy frame, but it felt like we were in a secure bunker. I was staring at the folder in my lap, but my mind was drifting back to 3 days ago, to the moment I had come home. I remembered the drive, crying for 4 solid hours from the city back to the estate. I had packed my entire life into 3 cardboard boxes and 1 suitcase. My startup, Ether, was supposed to be the next big thing in secure data transmission. I had spent 3 years of my life sleeping under my desk, living on instant noodles and skipping holidays. I poured every ounce of my being into that code. And then, just 2 weeks before our public launch, my world imploded. My lead investor pulled his funding overnight with no warning. A week later, a competitor, Momentum Corp, launched a product that was nearly identical to mine, right down to the user interface. My company was rendered worthless before it even had a chance to open its doors. I lost the office lease. I lost my apartment. I had less than $400 to my name. So I came home. I retreated to the supposed safety of the Reed estate. I walked through the front door with my head held low, ready to beg for a room in the house I grew up in. I remembered my father's reaction clearly. He didn't hug me. He let out a long, weary sigh. He looked at my boxes as if they were bags of trash the garbage collectors had missed. "Failure," he had said, "has a distinct smell, Maya. And you absolutely reek of it." I had believed him. I thought I was incompetent. I thought I had simply been outmaneuvered. "Maya." Eleanor's voice snapped me back to the present. She was watching me again. "You're thinking about your company," she said. It wasn't a question. "It failed," I said, my voice dull. I wasn't good enough. The market was too tough. Eleanor reached over and flipped a page in the folder on my lap. "Read," she commanded. I looked down at the document. It was a printout of an email. To Marcus Thorne, CEO of Momentum Corp. From Arthur Reed. Subject: Project Ether Source Code and Acquisition. The date was December 5th. That was 3 weeks ago, 1 week before my investor pulled his funding. I read the body of the email. My blood ran cold. "Marcus, as we discussed, attached is the proprietary algorithm for the Ether protocol. My daughter is brilliant, but she lacks the business acumen to protect her own creation. I am authorized to act on her behalf as a silent partner. I am prepared to transfer the full intellectual property rights to Momentum Corp for the sum of $1.8 million, deposited into the Cayman account we discussed. In return, you must launch immediately. Her investors will get cold feet, the company will fold, and she'll be none the wiser. It's just business. Regards, Arthur." I couldn't breathe. The paper was shaking in my hands. "He sold it," I whispered, my voice sounding distant and strange. "He didn't just watch me fail, he orchestrated it." "He stole it," Eleanor corrected, her voice hard. "He accessed your servers using the emergency backup password you gave him 3 years ago. He downloaded your life's work, sold it to your biggest competitor, and used the money to pay off his debts." I felt physically sick. The image of my father at dinner tonight, mocking my failure, flashed in my mind. Winners find a way to win. Losers find excuses. He had said that to me while eating oysters bought with my money. He had lectured me on my incompetence while wearing a suit paid for with my own genius. "He destroyed me," I said. The anger was coming back, hotter this time, a white-hot fury. "He watched me cry for 3 days. He watched me pack up my life. He told me I wasn't smart enough. He gaslit you," Eleanor said. "He needed you to fail. If you succeeded, you would have money and power. You wouldn't need him, and more importantly, he needed the cash. He cannibalized his own daughter to keep his lights on." She pointed to the dark house. "Well, the lights are off now." I looked at the email again. $1.8 million. That was the price he had put on my dreams. That was the value of his love. "How did you get this?" I asked. "I have sources in many places," Eleanor said dryly. "And Marcus Thorne is an arrogant fool. He boasted about the deal at a charity gala I attended in London. He had no idea that Maya Reed was my granddaughter. He just thought it was an amusing story about a ruthless father." She leaned in closer. "I bought the rights back, Maya." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What?" "I bought Momentum Corp yesterday morning. she said, as casually as if she were talking about buying groceries. Hostile takeover. It cost me a fortune, but I consider it a sound investment. Your code is secure. Your company is safe. It's currently sitting under the umbrella of Vance Holdings, waiting for its CEO to return. I felt tears welling in my eyes again, but these were different. These were tears of pure, overwhelming relief. My work wasn't gone. I wasn't a failure. You did that? For me? I did it for the family, she said sternly. The real family. Competence must be protected. Parasites must be removed. She took the folder from my lap and closed it. Now you know the full truth. You are not the sad little girl who couldn't make it in the big city. You are a tech innovator who was robbed by a desperate con artist. She looked at me expectantly. Does that change how you feel about walking through that door? I looked at the house. The flashlight beams were frantic now. I could see shadows moving past the windows as they searched for candles or blankets, shivering in the growing cold. Yes, I said, my voice hard as steel. I don't feel sad for them anymore. I don't feel like I owe them anything. Good, Eleanor said. I feel like I'm about to collect a debt. Eleanor smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen her look genuinely proud. That is precisely the right attitude, she said. Arthur Reed thinks he is the king of this castle because he has a loud voice and a heavy hand. He is about to discover that a king with no kingdom is just a man sitting in a funny chair. She checked her watch again. Time's up, she announced. The house is sufficiently chilled. The panic has taken root. They are primed for the next phase. She pressed the intercom button. Driver, she said, we are moving? Yes, ma'am. The engine purred, but the car didn't move forward. Instead, the driver flicked on the high beams. Twin shafts of blinding white light cut through the snowstorm, hitting the front of the house like spotlights in a prison break. The light flooded the living room window, illuminating the chaos inside. I thought about the $1.8 million. I thought about the click of the lock on the back door. I'm not cold anymore, I said. Good, Eleanor replied, because we are about to bring the fire. Eleanor pressed the intercom one last time. Execute phase 2. Enter the premises. It sounded like a military command, and in a way, it was. The locks on the limousine doors clicked open, the sound sharp and loud in the quiet cabin. Let's go, she said. The driver opened Eleanor's door. A second man, dressed in a dark suit and a heavy black overcoat, appeared at mine and opened it for me. The wind hit me again, still howling, still 15 degrees below zero, the snow still falling in thick, wet sheets. But this time, I didn't even flinch. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. I stood up straight. The wool coat Eleanor had given me felt heavy and protective, like a suit of armor. I buttoned it all the way to my chin. I looked toward the house. From the darkness of the driveway, 2 more men emerged, both large and broad-shouldered. They wore discreet earpieces and dark sunglasses, despite the fact that it was the middle of the night. They moved with a synchronized, predatory purpose. Security, Eleanor said, stepping up beside me. She had put on a fur hat and leather gloves, looking utterly impeccable, as if she owned the very concept of winter. Are they armed? I whispered. They are lawyers, she said, which is far more dangerous. She gestured to the man on her left. That is Mr. Davies. He is my personal attorney. He is carrying the eviction notices. She gestured to the man on her right. That is Mr. Ford. He is private security. He is here to ensure that if Arthur decides to throw one of his tantrums, he hits the floor before he hits anyone else. We stood there, a small phalanx in the snow. "Ready?" Eleanor asked me. I looked at the massive oak and glass front door. It was the door I had walked through 1,000 times. The door I had been terrified to approach just a few days ago, afraid of my father's disappointment. Now it just looked like a piece of wood. "I have nothing," I said suddenly, a flicker of doubt crossing my mind. "I have no money, no clothes, my things are all in there." Eleanor turned to me. The wind whipped her coat around her, but she stood as still as a statue. "You have the deeds, Maya," she said. I blinked. "What?" "You just don't know it yet," she said with a faint, cryptic smile. "But you will in about 3 minutes." She gestured toward the house. "Walk with me." We began to walk. It wasn't a rush. It was a slow, deliberate march up the center of the driveway, our path illuminated by the limo's headlights behind us. Our shadows stretched out long and distorted against the snow, reaching the house long before we did, like ghosts coming to reclaim our home. I saw movement in the front window. My father was there, pressing his face to the glass, squinting against the blinding glare of the headlights. He held a silver candlestick in his hand, an antique that had belonged to my mother. He must have seen us coming. 2 women and 2 men in black coats, marching out of a blizzard. It must have looked absolutely terrifying. I hoped it did. We reached the front steps, which were slick with a thin layer of ice. Arthur hadn't bothered to have them salted. He probably expected a groundskeeper to do it on New Year's Day. Mr. Ford, the security man, stepped forward. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell, which was useless without power anyway. He simply tried the handle. Locked. Of course. Arthur locked everything. Doors, windows, filing cabinets, emotions. Mr. Ford glanced at Eleanor. She gave a single curt nod. Mr. Ford reached into his pocket and produced a small metallic tool, a lockpick gun. "Is that legal?" I whispered. "It's my house," Eleanor said, her voice loud enough for the wind to carry. "I'm allowed to break into my own property if I've misplaced my keys." Snap. The lock clicked open. The heavy mechanism turned, and the door swung inward. The wind rushed past us, blowing a swirl of snow into the grand foyer. We stepped inside. The silence in the house was jarring. Normally there was music playing, the low hum of the furnace, the sounds of life. Now there was nothing. It was dead silent, and it was cold. The heat had been off for nearly 30 minutes, and the mansion's large open spaces were losing warmth fast. I could already feel the chill seeping into the air. We stood in the foyer. Across the hall, the dining room was lit by the flickering, desperate light of 3 candles on the table. The family was there, looking like a portrait of refugees in their own home. Catherine was wrapped in a tablecloth. Chloe was huddled next to her, still clutching her new designer bag, shivering and looking furious. Arthur stood in the middle of the room, holding the silver candlestick like a makeshift weapon. He looked livid. His hair was a mess, his tie loosened. He squinted at us in the gloom. "Who the hell is that?" he barked, his voice echoing in the cold, cavernous space. "I'm calling the police. Get out of my house." Mr. Davies, the attorney, stepped forward and clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and hit Arthur square in the face. Arthur flinched, throwing up a hand to shield his eyes. "Put that down," he yelled. And then Eleanor stepped into the beam of light. She didn't raise her voice. She simply began to remove her leather gloves, 1 finger at a time. "Hello, Arthur," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Heavier than the snow, heavier than the dark. Arthur slowly lowered his hand. His face went from a furious red to a pale, ghostly white in the span of a heartbeat. He looked like he had just seen an apparition. "Mother," he whispered. In the flesh, Eleanor said, though I must admit, it's a bit chillier in here than I was expecting. Did you forget to pay the heating bill? Catherine let out a little shriek. Eleanor! Oh my God, we thought Arthur said you were dead? Eleanor finished for her. Incapacitated? Drooling into a cup in a Zurich clinic? She walked forward, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Click, click, click. She stopped about 10 feet away from him. I was never sick, Arthur, she said. I was simply tired of you, so I took an extended vacation. But all vacations must come to an end. She motioned to me. Step forward, Maya. I stepped out from behind the security guard and walked into the pool of light. My father looked at me. He looked at my heavy wool coat. He looked at my dry, composed face. He looked at the way I was standing, not slouched, not cowering. Maya, he said, his voice laced with confusion. I told you to stay on the porch. I know, I said, my voice perfectly steady. It was the steadiest it had ever been. But grandmother offered me a ride, and her car has a much better heating system than you do. Chloe spoke up from the table. Why is the power out? Did you do this? My phone's at 10%. Quiet, Arthur snapped at her. He looked back at Eleanor, trying to regain his footing. He straightened his jacket and put on his negotiator face. Mother, he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. What a surprise. A wonderful surprise. We were just in the middle of our New Year's dinner. Please, come in. We can't offer you much warmth at the moment. The power seems to have gone out. The power is out because I had it cut, Eleanor said plainly. Arthur blinked. What? I severed the line, she said. I wanted to see how you handled a freeze. You seem to be quite fond of using the cold as a disciplinary tool. I thought you might enjoy experiencing it yourself. She glanced at the dining table, at the half-eaten food growing cold on the plates. This is a mess, she said, a reflex of command. She looked around the room with an expression of pure disgust. You've changed the drapes, she noted. Tacky. Mother, please, Arthur said, his voice straining. I don't know what's going on here, but let's all be reasonable. Maya was being difficult. It was a parenting decision. A parenting decision, Eleanor repeated. She turned to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, what is the legal definition of locking a person outside in sub-zero temperatures without adequate clothing? Mr. Davies opened his briefcase. The sound of the latches snapping open echoed in the room. Thwack, thwack. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. 52 minutes of exposure in temperatures below freezing, he recited in a flat monotone. Reckless endangerment. In some states, that could be construed as attempted manslaughter, and, given the specific clauses of the Vance Trust. He looked up over the top of his glasses. A material breach of contract. Arthur laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. Contract? What contract? I'm her father. I don't have a contract to raise my own daughter. No, Eleanor said, you don't. But you do have a contract to live in this house. She took another step closer. Or rather, you did. The air in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. This is my house, Arthur spat. You gave it to me 10 years ago. I gave you access, Eleanor corrected. I never transferred the deed. She nodded to Mr. Davies. Show him. Mr. Davies placed a document on the dining table, right next to the platter of oysters. The confrontation begins now, Eleanor whispered to me. Don't blink. I didn't blink. I watched my father snatch the paper from the table. I watched his hands shake. The reckoning had begun. He stared at the paper Mr. Davies had placed on the table, his hands trembling so hard The document rattled. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to sound authoritative, but his voice cracked. "This is nonsense. I have the title. It's in my safe." "You have a lease agreement," Eleanor said calmly. She had wandered over to the cold, dark fireplace and was inspecting a speck of dust on the mantel, not even looking at him. "A lease I graciously allowed you to sign for $1 a year. But if you'd care to read paragraph 4, section C, you'll find the termination clause." Arthur squinted at the document in the flickering candlelight. "Termination?" he sputtered. "You can't terminate my lease. I've lived here for 20 years. I've made improvements." "You painted the walls beige and sold an antique baccarat chandelier to pay for a ski trip," Eleanor said, finally turning to face him, her eyes like chips of ice. "That is not an improvement. That is vandalism." Catherine stood up, shivering violently in her makeshift tablecloth shawl. "Eleanor, please," she whined. "We're all freezing. Can't we just discuss this when the heat is back on? Can't we sit down and be a family?" "A family?" Eleanor laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Is that what you were doing when you watched Arthur lock Maya outside to freeze, being a family?" Catherine looked at me, and for the first time, she truly saw me. She saw the heavy wool coat, the expensive boots, the composure. She saw that I wasn't the shivering, pathetic girl who had begged for a warm meal an hour ago. We were teaching her a lesson," Catherine stammered. "She was being disrespectful to her father." "So you tried to freeze her to death," Eleanor stated. "It was just for 5 minutes," Arthur lied. "Mr. Davies," Eleanor said without turning. Mr. Davies glanced at his watch. 1 hour and 2 minutes, actually. The temperature outside is currently 14 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chill. According to medical data, frostbite begins to set in on exposed skin after 30 minutes. He looked at Arthur with zero emotion. "You weren't teaching her a lesson, Mr. Reed. You were committing a felony." Arthur slammed the paper down on the table. "I am her father!" he roared, the sudden noise making everyone jump except Eleanor. "I can discipline my daughter however I see fit. She is my child, and she lives under my roof." "Ah," Eleanor said, holding up a single finger, "and there it is, the fatal assumption." She walked slowly toward the table. "Under your roof?" she asked softly. "Yes," Arthur bellowed. "My roof, my house, my rules." Eleanor smiled, a terrifying, predatory smile. "Arthur," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than all his yelling, "you haven't owned a roof since 1998. She nodded to Mr. Davies. "Show him the real deed." Mr. Davies reached into his briefcase again. He pulled out a thick, official-looking document bound in blue paper. It looked old, its edges slightly yellowed. He placed it directly on top of the oyster platter. 26 years ago, Mr. Davies began, his voice clear and resonant. Mrs. Eleanor Vance transferred all primary assets of Vance Holdings, including this estate, all stock portfolios, and the family trust, into a single holding company. Arthur was breathing heavily, sweating despite the cold. "So what?" he snapped. "I control the holding company. I'm the executor." "You were the acting executor," Mr. Davies corrected. "A temporary position, designed to hold the assets in place until a specific condition was met." "What condition?" Arthur demanded. Mr. Davies pointed to the bottom of the document. "The assets were to be held in trust," he read, "until the first direct female heir reached the age of 25. The room went dead silent. I felt my heart pound against my ribs. 25. I had turned 25 last week, on the exact same day my company collapsed, on the day I had come home, broken and crying. Arthur froze. He stared at the document. He knew the date. He knew my birthday. "No," he whispered. Yes, Eleanor said. You can't do that, Arthur stammered. She's incompetent. She just ran a company into the ground. She can't manage an estate of this size. She ran a company into the ground because you stole her intellectual property and sold it to her biggest competitor. Eleanor's voice lashed out like a whip. Don't think for a second I forgot about that, Arthur. We'll be discussing the embezzlement charges later. Right now, we're discussing the house. She walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and grounding. Mr. Davies, she said, as of this moment, who is the legal owner of this property? Mr. Davies looked at the paper. The deed of ownership transferred automatically at 12:01 a.m. on December 23rd, he said. He looked directly at me. The owner is Miss Maya Reed. My father's champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered, the remaining drops of champagne spreading across the white stone. Maya? Catherine gasped, looking at me with pure horror. Maya owns the house? She owns the house, Eleanor confirmed. She owns the cars. She owns the furniture. She owns the very fork you're holding, Catherine. And she certainly owns the heating system, which, as the rightful owner, she has decided to turn off for emergency maintenance. Arthur was staring at me, his face a mask of utter shock and disbelief. You knew, he whispered to me. You knew this whole time. You set me up. I stepped forward and looked him right in the eye. No, I said. I didn't know. I took a breath. The air was frigid, but I felt like I was on fire. I came home thinking I was a failure, I said. I came home believing I needed your help. I begged you for a place to stay, and you treated me like a stray dog you couldn't wait to get rid of. Maya, listen, Arthur started, his voice changing instantly. The rage was gone, replaced by a sickeningly sweet charm. It was pathetic to watch. He stepped over the broken glass, holding his hands out as if in supplication. Honey, you have to understand, I was under a lot of stress. The business, it's been difficult. I was just trying to toughen you up for a tough world. He tried to smile, but it was a weak, trembling thing. I'm your dad, he said. We're a team, right? You and me. Think of what we can do with this estate now that it's yours. I can help you manage it. You don't know the first thing about running a property this size. I can— Stop, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut him off mid-sentence. You sold my company, I stated. He blinked. What? Ether, I said. You sold it to Momentum Corp for $1.8 million. You stole my work. You stole my future. His face went gray. How did you— It doesn't matter how I know, I said. I know. You're not a father. You're a thief. I turned my gaze to Catherine. She was clutching her pearls, her eyes darting between Arthur and me, furiously calculating her odds. And you, I said to her, you watched him lock me out. You sat there and ate oysters while I was freezing. You laughed. I didn't laugh, Catherine cried. I was nervous. It was a nervous laugh. Maya, you know I love you. I've always treated you like my own daughter. You treated me like a prop, I said, and Chloe treated me like her personal ATM. Chloe, who had been silent this whole time, finally stood up. This is ridiculous, she snapped, grabbing her new handbag. I'm going to a hotel. Dad, give me the credit card. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. I'm afraid all credit cards associated with the Reed accounts were frozen as of an hour ago, he said politely. A fraud protection measure was triggered by the transfer of ownership. Chloe froze. What? You're broke, Eleanor said, pouring herself a glass of water from a pitcher on the table. Actually, it's worse than that. You're in debt. The credit cards are all maxed out. Arthur collapsed into his chair, putting his head in his hands. This can't be happening, he mumbled. I had a plan. I had everything under control. You had nothing, Eleanor said. You were playing house with money that was never yours. She turned to me. Well, Miss Reed, she said, this is your house. These are your trespassers. Mr. Davies is awaiting your instructions. I looked at them. I looked at the father who had bullied me for 25 years. I looked at the stepmother who had made me feel small and ugly. I looked at the stepsister who had stolen pieces of my childhood. They were all staring at me now, waiting, hoping. Maya, Arthur said, looking up. There were tears in his eyes. Real tears, fake tears. I didn't care anymore. Please, it's New Year's. You can't be serious. Let's just talk about this in the morning. I remembered the cold. I remembered the sound of the lock sliding shut. I remembered standing in the snow, watching them toast to their perfect life. I looked at Mr. Davies. What are my options? I asked. You have the right to order their immediate eviction, he said. They have no lease. They have no legal tenancy agreement. They are, in the eyes of the law, squatters. Eviction? Catherine shrieked. Now, tonight, in a blizzard? It is cold out there, I said softly, about 15 degrees. I looked straight at my father. But don't worry, I said, I won't make you stand on the porch. A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. Thank you, Maya, he breathed. I knew you were reasonable. I knew you were a good person. I'm not making you stand on the porch, I continued, my voice hardening like ice, because I want you off the property entirely. I pointed to the front door. Get out. The silence in the room was absolute. Maya, Arthur whispered, you can't mean that. I want them out, I said to Mr. Davies. Now, tonight, right this second. Understood, he said. He signaled to the security guards. Mr. Ford and the other guard stepped forward, looking enormous in the flickering candlelight. You heard the owner, Mr. Ford rumbled. Let's go. Wait, Catherine screamed. My clothes, my jewelry. I need to pack my things. You will leave with what you are wearing, I said. Everything else in this house was purchased with money from the trust. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to me. You can't keep my clothes, Chloe yelled. That bag is mine. I just got it. Actually, I said, glancing at the silver wrapping paper on the floor, that bag was purchased with a card linked to the account my father stole from, so technically, I bought it for myself. Thanks for unwrapping it for me. I held out my hand. Chloe stared at me, then at the security guard, who took a menacing step toward her. With a scream of pure frustration, she hurled the bag at me. I caught it. Start walking, I said. The scene that followed was chaotic, loud, and messy, and it was the most satisfying thing I had ever witnessed. The guards began to usher them toward the door. Catherine was sobbing, trying to grab a silver vase from a side table as she passed, but Mr. Ford gently removed it from her grasp. Property of the estate, ma'am, he said. Arthur tried to dig his heels in at the doorway. Maya, he yelled over his shoulder. We're family. You can't do this to family. I stood in the center of the foyer as the wind blew in through the open door, swirling snow across the marble floor. You're right, I said. Family doesn't do this. I walked right up to him and looked him in the eye one last time. You were my family, I said, until you changed the locks. Now you're just a bad tenant. I nodded to Mr. Ford. Remove him. Mr. Ford gave him a firm shove. Arthur stumbled out onto the icy porch and slipped, falling to his knees in the exact spot where I had been shivering an hour before. Catherine and Chloe stumbled out after him. They stood there in the snow in their evening clothes, Catherine in her thin silk dress, Arthur in his velvet jacket, Chloe in a flimsy blouse. They looked small. They looked cold. Here, I said. I grabbed 3 coats from the guest rack by the door. thin, cheap coats we kept for visitors. I tossed them out onto the snow. "I'm not a monster," I said. "Put those on. The walk to the main gate is a mile. You'll need them." "The gate!" Arthur yelled, scrambling to put on the coat. "We can't walk to the gate. Let us take one of the cars." "The cars are company property," Eleanor called out from the dining room. She had emerged, holding a glass of wine. "And I've revoked your driving privileges. Besides, the keys are in the safe." My father looked at us. He looked at the warm, dark house he had ruled for 2 decades. He looked at the daughter he had tormented. "You will regret this," he screamed, the wind tearing the words from his mouth. "You'll need me. You don't know how to run this place." "I'll figure it out," I said. "I'm a quick learner. I learn from the best." I glanced at Eleanor. She winked. I grabbed the heavy oak door. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. "Don't forget to write." I slammed the door shut. I threw the deadbolt. Click. The sound echoed through the silent house. It was the sound of a prison cell door opening, not closing. I was free. I leaned my back against the door and let out a long breath. My legs felt weak, but my spirit felt lighter than it had in years. "Well done," Eleanor said. She was standing in the foyer, illuminated by Mr. Davies's flashlight, looking like a queen surveying her conquered territory. "Is it over?" I asked. "The battle is over," she said. "The war for your future has just begun. We have a company to rebuild and a house to redecorate. I wasn't joking about those drapes. They're hideous." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest and filled the empty hall. "I can't believe they're actually walking," I said, "in the snow. It builds character," Eleanor said dryly. "Isn't that what he always told you?" She walked over and handed me the glass of wine she was holding. "To the new CEO of Vance Holdings," she said. I took the glass. I looked around the dark, cold house. It was freezing in here, but I didn't feel it. I felt the warmth of ownership. I felt the heat of justice. "To the hostile takeover," I said. I took a sip. It tasted like victory. "Now," Eleanor said, pulling her fur coat a little tighter, "let's get the heat back on. I'm freezing." "How do we do that?" I asked. "Simple," she said, pulling out her phone. "I call the driver. He flips the switch back at the junction box." She dialed. "Driver, execute phase 3. Power up." 10 seconds later, the house hummed to life. The chandelier above us blazed with light, flooding the foyer in a golden glow. The tree in the corner lit up, and the furnace kicked on with a low, powerful rumble. The darkness was gone. I walked to the window and looked out. I couldn't see them anymore. The storm had already swallowed them whole. All that remained were 3 sets of footprints leading away from my house, slowly being erased by the falling snow. I closed the drapes. He locked me out in 15-degree weather to teach me a lesson. He wanted to show me I was powerless and that I would always need him. Instead, my grandmother arrived and showed me who really owned the kingdom. I stood by the window as the house filled with warmth, realizing that family isn't about blood. It's about who hands you a coat when you're freezing and who helps you change the locks. If you've ever been frozen out by the very people who were supposed to keep you warm, hit that subscribe button. Share your own story in the comments below. And always remember, when they lock you out, don't just stand there knocking. Buy the building. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means you're planning your strategy.